In 2001, Ian Duncan Smith was elected as leader of the Conservative Party by a majority of all party members. In 2003, he was deposed as leader by the Conservative Parliamentary Party. Michael Howard was made the leader of the party. There was no election, as he was the only candidate put forward by the MPs. A general election was expected in 2005. In March 2005, Michael Howard sacked Howard Flight MP from his position as Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party and withdrew the whip from him so he could not stand for election as a Conservative.
Wins over the government in recent weeks. Are the Conservatives now in as much internal disarray as they were when John Major launched his ill-fated Back to Basics campaign? Here's David Grossman.
Arundel Castle was built by the Normans. Now the place is being fought over by the Howards, Michael Howard and Howard Flight. A determined leader is facing down rebellious locals.
The mood is one of anger. People are talking about tearing up their membership cards and refusing to canvass. That's the sort of mood that you quite commonly find when you consult with people.
Back at Conservative HQ, the leader had something to say.
Good morning. Thank you very much for coming along. Fair play matters.
No, Mr. Howard wasn't announcing a change of heart. This was a press conference about immigration. However, reporters did want to know if this commitment to playing fair extended to Howard Flight.
Very clearly. A fundamental point here is that this is about accountability and responsibility. We all have to be accountable for the things that we say. As I said when we discussed this previously, we will be totally direct with the British people. We will do what we promise. We will make no promises we can't deliver. We won't promise one thing before an election and do something else after an election. We won't say one thing in private and another in public.
It's not just here in Arundel that there's anger at Howard Flight's treatment. All over the country, Conservative MPs are worried that Michael Howard has set a precedent, that in future they'll be just delegates of the party leader rather than representatives of their constituencies and their electorates. Don't expect many of them to speak out at the moment, though. We've contacted plenty, and they all say one thing. They're not going to rock the boat this close to a general election. However, after polling day, expect this subject to come up again.
For Conservative MPs, they must be shaking in their boots because they now know that the slightest indiscretion, they are only there in Parliament at the whim of the leader if his decision stands. At any moment in time, he can take a dislike to something they have said, even a minor matter, and many people would think that what Howard Flight said was pretty minor, then they can be dismissed and got rid of. That is bad for democracy, it's bad for the Conservative Party, and I hope that Howard Flight will fight it all the way through.
In Arundel, some accuse Mr. Howard of overturning centuries of Conservative philosophy. Traditionally, Tories don't believe in centralised power, but in networks of local voluntary groups, what Edmund Burke called the little platoons.
I'm a local district councillor. We're always complaining about the government imposing matters on us, so we've got no freedom, no autonomy. And this is a little bit the same, and we're disturbed that our leader does the sort of things that we're complaining that Mr. Blair's been doing.
This is not the first time there have been allegations of bullying from the centre. Sheila Gunn, with the red folder, used to be John Major's press secretary. Today, she was imposed on Slough Conservatives as their candidate, like it or not. Previous prospective candidate was Adrian Hilton. He was deselected for a controversial article about Catholicism, originally published nearly 2 years ago.
It's important we all believe, as Michael Howard does, in party discipline. But of course discipline has to be fair and consistent. In the case of Adrian Hilton, the discipline meted out to him has been unfair and arbitrary.
And Michael Howard does seem to be going further than his predecessors. The reason Howard Flight can't stand as a Conservative candidate is he's had the whip withdrawn. In effect, he's been thrown out of the parliamentary party. Although John Major did take the whip away from the Maastricht rebels who made his life such a misery, he did give it back in time for the election so they could defend their seats.
It's unprecedented for somebody to lose the whip, not get it back, and remain, even though they're remaining a member of the Conservative Party, and support it. So it's just quite extraordinary. This is dictatorship. It's very dangerous. It's very dangerous for the Conservative Party and dangerous for democracy in the United Kingdom.
They had pretty direct ways of dealing with outside threats when this castle was built, but what can Howard Flight do today? Well, one factor he's got in his favour is he's got lots of money, and money buys you lawyers, and lawyers can make things pretty uncomfortable for Michael Howard.
I've gone to the expense of getting an opinion by the leading QC on this territory, and I'm making that available to my party chairman and to the joint chairman of the Conservative Party, and I hope, having read it, that they will accept what it says, which is that the matter has to be resolved by the members of my own Conservative Association.
And in Arundel, Mr. Flight's supporters are pressing for a meeting of all party members to resolve the matter.
Shouldn't you just, this close to an election, just be quiet, don't rock the boat, let Michael Howard have his way?
Well, I think that Michael Howard made the mistake, and now he's paying for it. But what we're trying to do is to get a suitable solution by having an extraordinary general meeting, drawing the line under it and move on. If we don't have that, understandably, Howard Flight will continue to campaign for justice.
So the Battle of Arundel goes on. Which Howard will end up the conqueror is still uncertain.
David Grossman, I'm joined now by Howard Flight and by Nick Wood, who worked in Tory Central Office until quite recently. Mr. Flight, do you accept, I presume you do, that all parties have to be disciplined? It's the leader's job to enforce the discipline. You stepped out of line, so you deserve to be punished quite severely.
I certainly accept that all parties have to have a discipline, and I'd make the point that I think in the recent past the Conservative Party didn't have enough discipline. The question is, how far does that go? But the main point, as far as my own experience is concerned, is that I really do not think that I said anything which was actually out of line.
Seriously?
I did not say there was any hidden agenda. This is what has been spun by the Labour Party. The leading,
by your own leader, apparently.
One of the leading political journalists of our time, Andrew Alexander, was also a speaker. I'm glad to say he will be reporting what I said in the context. And at that particular meeting, I spent 10 minutes defending the Conservative line, defending Michael Howard against people with more radical views, and the speech I gave was all about how the James Review had come to be, what its commitments were, and I made absolutely clear that those were the commitments of the Conservative Party.
So you've done nothing wrong? You've done nothing wrong?
What happened was that some presumed Labour person was planted there, sends a tape to the Times. My lawyers have asked for the tape so the whole transcript will be played, hasn't been provided. Publish answer to some questions, incorrectly described as speech. The answers to the questions were in essence saying that, first of all, the James Review had quite understandably to look at the total territory and work out what was politically doable, and secondly, that we naturally had aspirations to reduce taxation and get greater taxpayer efficiency in government.
So Michael Howard's a fool then?
No, I think
well, how can he have fallen for this if it's simply a trick?
The problem was that the media, the Times spun it. Labour's great friend Baldwin wrote ridiculous stories that I'd said that we'd got a secret agenda and we were going to cut public spending and goodness knows what. Massive, ridiculous spinning, and not surprisingly, that greatly upset a lot of colleagues standing in marginal seats. And I entirely understand.
It upset the leader of your party.
Of course it did.
Is he, forgive me though, for pursuing this point, are you saying, you know, you have the opportunity, if you wish, to apologise to Michael Howard tonight, apologise to the members of your party for all the confusion that you've caused, instead of which you were in effect saying that Michael Howard must be really rather dim if he believes Labour Party spin?
No, let me make it clear. I totally apologise for the embarrassment I caused. I hate it. I couldn't be a keener Tory. We've absolutely got to win the election. And that was why I immediately said, I'm very happy to resign as a token to the extent my words have been misinterpreted. But if you actually read what it said, it's a complete nonsense to say I was saying we had a hidden agenda to make massive cuts in public spending.
Why does Michael Howard believe that?
Well, I think that, and I understand Michael was in a difficult position because the Labour spin on it caused the Conservatives embarrassment.
So he's panicked then.
And if I were him, I would have wanted to have done something pretty strong to have reversed that panic.
As opposed to saying, Howard Flight's a decent fellow, he said absolutely nothing out of line, and pursuing your interpretation. I mean, the implication of what you were saying is not simply Labour Party spin or Labour's friends in the press, but somehow the leader of your party is so daft, he's fallen for all this.
Well, I think that there were the write-up of it, and basically he's got many things to do. The write-up of it in the Times, and candidly I blame the Times, I don't blame Michael, but the write of it that came across was clearly damaging to us.
But presumably he's spoken to you and he could have said, you could have explained all this and he could have said, oh, fair enough.
Well, we had if you like, a civilized discussion on the Thursday evening, but I think that what I regard as completely silly media coverage on the Friday was very damaging to us, and I accept that and I apologise for it.
Whoever's right or wrong about this, do you accept this is very, very damaging to the party at a time when Conservatives, week after week, seem to be making some headway, at least tactically, against the government?
Yes, I think the point I'd make about what Howard said, that right across the media, from pro-conservative to anti-conservative newspapers, all interpreted it in the same way, and the broadcasters have also interpreted Howard's remarks in the same way. So the basic parameters of this story have been established, if you like, that what Howard said amounted to saying that the Conservative Party did have a hidden agenda to cut public spending beyond that. That's what everyone's now signed up to, whether it's fair or not. Is it damaging? Well, it's clearly damaging. I think the really important issue now is to do with the authority of Michael Howard.
Michael Howard, you can't back down now, whether he's right or wrong.
Michael Howard has put his authority on the line here. He has said that he does not want Howard as his candidate in Arundel. And the longer this affair drags on, obviously the worse it gets, because the more difficult it becomes for Michael Howard and the leadership of the party to put their case across on the issues that really matter to people.
But it's not just authority, is it? It's judgment. It's judgment as well. Whether he was right to say, OK, you can no longer be deputy chairman of the party, seems to be accepted by many of the Conservative MPs we talked to off the record today. But the question of deselecting him as an MP, imposing that on a party, raises all kinds of questions about why anybody should get out and work for your party in the next election.
Well, the judgment, of course there is a judgment issue. And I would say the judgment that Michael Howard was faced with was a pretty fine one. But if Howard had stood in Arundel, what would the Labour Party do? They'd be flooding the constituency with cabinet ministers, with activists, with men in funny suits and funny hats. They'd turn it into a circus, and they'd use Howard's constituency and his candidature as a platform, really, for rerunning their campaign. The central issue of this campaign really is the tax and spend argument. And they would use Howard.
That's a fair point, isn't it? You would be an absolute distraction to Michael Howard's campaign.
Well, given the spin, that's why I said I did understand why Michael felt the need to try to do something symbolic to reverse it, stamp it, and the rest of it. But I still say it's a pretty poor thing for this country if we're all governed by the spin way in which journalists write things up. And you will note that many people have since said this is ridiculous. Now, the chairman at the meeting, who's been away until this morning, has written a letter to the Times making it very clear that no one who was there thought I was saying this.
But why don't you just go quietly? I mean, why don't you just say the party is more important than you are?
I have thought about that, and I've taken advice and all the rest of it, and it's quite a complex situation, and I'm not in a very nice position. And believe it or not, I remain a great Conservative Party loyalist, 40 years and all the rest of it. But I just make this point, whatever I do causes potential problems, because there are a lot of people out there, and your programme referred to them, that do feel there are some other quite important issues here. And I think it will run and run and run if I said, well, I've had enough of this, I'm going. That is why it seems to me the only proper way to resolve it, which I also think that the party will understand when it finally gets this learned council's review, is to simply let the constituents of Arundel, let the members of the Arundel Association decide, and I will abide by their decision. Many of them may well say, this is embarrassing for the Conservative Party, I should go.
Okay, Mr. Flight, we'll leave it there. Thank you both.
An extraordinary general meeting of the Arundel Conservative Association was held, at which the party chairman, Liam Fox, attended. Threats were made that if the local party did not support Michael Howard, they would be put into support status and taken over by Conservative Central Office. The members of the association voted to deselect Howard Flight. The Tory party suffered a heavy defeat in the general election of 2005. In 2010, Howard Flight was given a peerage.